My name is Sarah Mitchell, 45 years old. I was driving to a family party in Annapolis. My service dress whites pressed sharp, two silver stars gleaming on my shoulders. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat. A text from my sister: "Don't embarrass the family with that uniform. You're already a failure in their eyes." My grip tightened on the wheel knuckles white. Failure. I'd led missions that saved lives, commanded ships through storms, earned those stars with 20 years of sweat and sacrifice. Yet my family saw me as a disappointment, a stain on their perfect social image. I glanced at the uniform hanging in the back, its crisp white fabric a symbol of everything they despised. I wasn't going to hide who I was, not tonight. At that party, I'd walk in with my head-high stars shining, and when my sister's husband, a Navy officer himself, stood and saluted, calling me Admiral, their world would turn. Have you ever been made to feel small for what makes you proud? Drop your story in the comments, hit that subscribe button, and let's talk about standing tall. I stared at the road ahead, the hum of my car's engine steady, but my mind was already slipping back. 20 years ago, I stood in my dress blues at the Naval Academy graduation, scanning the crowd for my family. My mother and father weren't there. They'd chosen a charity gala over my ceremony, leaving me with a voicemail. "Sarah, we're proud, but tonight's important for the family image." I was 25, clutching my diploma alone. My sister, 17, then got a convertible for her birthday that week. I got a thrift store dress 2 sizes too big, with a note: "Wear something feminine next time." I'd laughed it off, but it stung. They saw my uniform as a rebellion, not a career. Years later, deployed on a destroyer in the Pacific, I called home one Christmas Eve. I was 35, commanding my first ship, the weight of 100 sailors' lives on me. I dialed from the bridge, hoping for a moment of warmth. My mother answered, her voice clipped. "Sarah, we're at a party. Your sister's here, shining as always." I heard laughter in the background, glasses clinking, and my sister's voice sharp and smug. "She's probably barking orders at someone." The line went dead before I could respond. I stood there, the cold metal of the ship's console under my fingers, realizing they'd never see me. Not as a leader, not as a daughter, just as a failure who chose the wrong path. The memories didn't stop there. At a family dinner 5 years ago, my father pulled me aside. "Sarah, your sister's building a real legacy, charity board, society pages. You could have done that, not this Navy nonsense." I'd just been promoted to captain, but he didn't ask about it. Instead, he handed me a glass of wine and walked away to toast my sister's latest influencer deal. She'd smirked, her diamond earrings catching the light, and said, "Maybe one day you'll figure out what success looks like." I swallowed my anger, left early, and drove back to base. That night, I pinned my new rank to my uniform, promising myself I'd never let their words define me. Every slight, every dismissal built a wall between us. My mother's texts were always about appearances. "Don't mention your job at the gala." My father's calls were about leverage. "Can you connect me with someone at the Pentagon?" My sister's posts online painted me as the odd one out, the tomboy who never grew up. Yet I kept trying, sent gifts, called on birthdays, hoping for a crack in their armor. There was none. They wanted me to fit their mold, to trade my stars for their spotlight. I didn't. I couldn't. The worst was 2 years ago, at a fundraiser my mother hosted. I'd flown in from Norfolk, still in my service khakis, fresh off a deployment. I'd saved a dozen sailors in a training mishap, earned a commendation. I thought maybe this time they'd see it. I walked in, and my sister rolled her eyes. "Sarah, you look like a drill sergeant." My mother pulled me aside, whispering, "This isn't the place for that uniform." My father didn't even look up from his conversation with some investor. I left before dessert, my commendation still in my pocket, unmentioned. On the flight back, I stared at the medal and swore I'd stop chasing their approval. Now driving to this party, those moments burned in my chest. My sister's text, "Don't embarrass the family," was just the latest cut. They'd spent decades trying to erase who I was, to shame me for the stars on my shoulders. But tonight wasn't about their approval. It was about truth. I stepped out of the car, my service dress whites crisp the 2 silver stars on my shoulders catching the evening light. The Annapolis mansion buzzed with chatter-string lights glowing above the lawn where my parents' 40th anniversary party was in full swing. I straightened my cover, took a breath, and walked toward the entrance. Heads turned. Guests in tailored suits and glittering dresses paused mid-sip, their eyes flicking from my uniform to the medals pinned to my chest. I felt the weight of their stares, but I kept my chin up. This was their world society pages clinking champagne flutes. But I wasn't here to blend in. My sister spotted me first. She stood near the grand staircase, her designer gown shimmering, a glass of wine in hand. Her smile froze, then twisted into a scowl. She marched over her heels, clicking on the marble floor, and stopped inches from me. "Sarah, you actually wore that," she hissed loud enough for nearby guests to turn. "You're such a failure embarrassing us like this." Her words cut sharp and deliberate, echoing across the room. A few guests gasped, others whispered. My jaw tightened, but I held her gaze, refusing to flinch. My mother appeared, her pearl necklace gleaming, her face a mask of forced calm. "Sarah, this is a celebration," she said, her voice low but edged with warning. "You're drawing attention for all the wrong reasons." She gestured toward a side table away from the main crowd, as if I were a misbehaving child to be tucked out of sight. My father stood across the room chatting with a group of investors, his back to me. He didn't even glance over. Typical. They'd spent decades pretending I didn't exist unless it suited them. I handed my sister a small box, a Navy commendation badge I'd earned after a rescue mission. "For you," I said, keeping my voice steady. She opened it, glanced at the badge, and tossed it onto a nearby table next to a pile of untouched gift bags. "Cute," she said, smirking. "But this isn't a military parade." A few guests chuckled, their eyes darting between us. My chest burned, but I didn't let it show. I'd faced worse than her mockery storms at sea, life or death calls. This was nothing. I moved to the side table my mother had pointed to, where lesser guests were seated, out-of-town cousins, minor business associates. The main tables were reserved for my sister's inner circle, her influencer friends snapping photos for their feeds. I sat, my uniform stark against their sequins, and scanned the room. That's when I caught the eye of my sister's husband, James Larson. He stood near the bar, his Navy lieutenant's posture unmistakable even in civilian clothes. His gaze lingered on me, not with judgment, but something else. Curiosity, maybe respect. It was fleeting, but it planted a seed of unease. Did he know something? The band struck up a slow tune, and my sister took the microphone, her voice syrupy sweet. "Thank you all for celebrating our parents' 40 years of love," she said, raising her glass. The crowd clapped, but her eyes locked on me, cold and pointed. "Let's honor family tonight, those who actually show up for it." The jab landed hard, a public slap disguised as a toast. Guests shifted uncomfortably, some avoiding my gaze, others whispering. My mother nodded approvingly, her smile tight. My father finally looked my way, but only to frown before turning back to his conversation. I gripped the edge of my chair, my knuckles whitening. Every fiber of me wanted to stand to call out their hypocrisy right then. But I didn't. Not yet. I'd learned long ago that timing was everything. Their words, their dismissal, only fueled what was coming. My sister thought she'd humiliated me, that her stage was hers alone. She was wrong. This party wasn't over, and I wasn't the one who'd leave in disgrace. James's glance stayed with me, a puzzle I couldn't yet solve. But soon, the truth would unravel, hers, theirs, all of it. The sting of my sister's words at the party lingered, but it wasn't new. It was just another layer on a wound they'd been carving for years. 3 weeks ago, my father called me, his voice smooth as polished mahogany. "Sarah, we need to talk business," he said, no warmth, no greeting. I was in my office at the naval base, files stacked high, prepping for a briefing on a new weapons contract. I put him on speaker, half expecting another lecture about my wasted career. Instead, he got to the point. I have a friend, General Paul Whitaker, who needs insight on a Pentagon deal. You're in a position to help. It's for the family. His tone was casual, like he was asking for a favor, not a breach of security. I froze, my pen hovering over a report. Robert, I can't do that. I said, my voice steady but cold. You know why? He chuckled, dismissive. Don't be so rigid, Sarah. This could secure our legacy. I hung up, my pulse racing. My father wasn't just asking for a favor, he was pushing me to betray my oath. The weapons contract was classified, tied to a new missile defense system. Leaking details could cost lives, careers, everything I'd built. I stared at the phone, the weight of his words sinking in. He didn't care about my stars, my rank, or the sailors under my command. To him, I was a tool, a means to an end for his real estate empire. I'd seen that look in his eyes before at dinners where he'd toast my sister's success while ignoring mine. But this was different. This was dangerous. The next day, my mother called. Her voice was softer, laced with that practiced charm she used at her charity galas. Sarah, your father's under pressure, she said. This deal with Whitaker could save us. You don't want to let the family down, do you? The guilt trip was textbook, but it hit hard. I remembered her pulling the same card when I was a kid, begging me to skip a school event for one of her fundraisers. I'd refused then, and I refused now. Diane, I won't compromise my duty, I told her. She sighed, long and dramatic. You've always been so selfish, Sarah. The line went quiet, but her words echoed, twisting the knife. Then came my sister. Her call came late, her voice dripping with fake concern. Sarah, you're making this harder than it needs to be, she said. Whitaker's a big deal. Help Dad, and maybe we'll finally respect you. I laughed, bitter. Emily, respect isn't bought with betrayal. She scoffed, her influencer persona cracking. You're such a failure, Sarah. Always playing the hero, but you're nothing to us. She hung up, leaving me staring at my desk, the commendation badge I'd planned to give her glinting in the lamplight. I'd thought foolishly that it might mean something to her. It didn't. I couldn't shake the unease. My family wasn't just asking for a favor, they were entangled in something bigger. That's when the email came late at night from Thomas Reynolds, my trusted officer. I'd served with Thomas for a decade, his loyalty unquestioned since we'd pulled through a storm together on the USS Cole. His message was short, urgent. Found something on Whitaker. Check your secure inbox. I opened the encrypted file, my heart pounding. It was a financial trail linking my father's real estate firm to Whitaker's private accounts. Payments, dates, and a single line that stopped me cold: funds tied to failed missile test 2015. Cover-up suspected. The test had gone wrong, injuring sailors, costing lives. Whitaker had buried it, and my father had profited. I leaned back, the pieces falling into place. My family didn't just want a favor, they were complicit. Whitaker had used my father's connections to hide his negligence, and now they needed me to keep the secret buried. My mother's guilt, my sister's taunts, my father's pressure. It was all a coordinated push to pull me into their web. I closed the laptop, my resolve hardening. They thought they could manipulate me, use my rank for their gain. They were wrong. I'd spent years proving my worth to a family that never cared. Now I'd show them what my stars meant, not just to me, but to the sailors who'd trusted me, the ones Whitaker and my father had betrayed. This party would be their reckoning. I slipped away from the side table, the hum of the party fading as I stepped into a quiet hallway. My sister's taunt failure still burned, but it was fuel now. I had work to do. My phone vibrated in my pocket, a secure message from Thomas Reynolds. I'd reached out to him an hour ago, right after my mother tried to hide me from the guests. Meet me at the base, 1900 hours, I texted him, my fingers steady despite the anger coursing through me. Thomas was already on his way, his loyalty as solid as the day we'd navigated a typhoon together. I needed him now, not just for support, but for the truth buried in that 2015 missile test. I found a private corner, the distant clink of champagne glasses barely audible. I dialed Thomas. Captain Reynolds, I said, keeping my voice low. What do you have? His tone was clipped professional. "Admiral, I've got a report from the test site. Casualties were covered up, and Whitaker's name is all over it. I'm sending it now." My phone pinged and I opened the file, a detailed log of the failed missile launch naming General Paul Whitaker as the officer who signed off on the falsified report. 8 sailors injured, 2 dead, all swept under the rug to protect a defense contract. My father's firm was listed as a funding source, his signature on a related payment. My stomach churned. They weren't just greedy, they were complicit in betrayal. I needed more. "Thomas, can you get a witness?" I asked. He paused, then said, "Charles Donovan, retired captain, was on that project. He's in Annapolis willing to talk. I'll bring him to the party." Charles Donovan, a name I hadn't heard in years. He'd trained me as a young officer, his integrity unshakable. If anyone could confirm Whitaker's cover-up, it was him. "Get him here by 2100, I said. "We're ending this tonight." Thomas didn't hesitate. "Yes, ma'am." I hung up, my resolve sharpening. The party was about to become a reckoning. As I pocketed my phone, something caught my eye, a glint on the table where my sister had tossed my commendation badge. Among the gift bags, a pair of her diamond earrings lay discarded, forgotten, in her rush to humiliate me. I picked them up, the stones cold in my palm. Something felt off. The backing was heavier than it should be, a faint wire protruding. My training kicked in. I slipped into a nearby study, grabbed a letter opener, and pried open the casing. Inside was a tiny device no bigger than a grain of rice, a listening bug. My heart raced. Emily wasn't just mocking me, she was spying, likely for Whitaker. The earrings were a gift from him. I remembered her boasting weeks ago. This wasn't just personal, it was calculated. I called Thomas again. "Check for surveillance tech tied to Whitaker," I said. "My sister's involved." His voice tightened. "On it, Admiral. I'll cross-reference the financial trail." I sent him a photo of the bug, my hand steady but my mind racing. Emily's role wasn't just manipulation, she was a link in their chain. The bug tied her to Whitaker's scheme, recording conversations that could have included my own classified briefings. I'd been careful, but the betrayal cut deeper than her words at the party. My family wasn't just using me, they were endangering lives. I returned to the hallway, slipping the bug into my pocket. I needed one more piece of evidence, something undeniable to show the guests. I texted Thomas again. "Find video from the test site. Anything that shows the failure." He replied instantly. "Got a lead on a maintenance crew's footage. It's raw, shows the explosion. Sending to your secure tablet." I checked my tablet, hidden in my car outside. The video loaded, a grainy clip of the missile misfiring, smoke billowing, sailors scrambling. Whitaker's voice barked orders in the background, dismissing the chaos. My father's logo flashed on a crate nearby. It was enough. I glanced at my watch, 8:30 p.m. The party was peaking, my sister's laughter echoing from the main room. Charles would arrive soon, and Thomas was already en route with the files. The bug in my pocket felt like a ticking bomb, proof of my family's deception. I adjusted my uniform, the silver stars heavy on my shoulders. I wasn't the failure here. They'd built their empire on lies, and I'd tear it down with the truth. Tonight at this party, their masks would fall, and I'd make sure every guest saw it. The band's music faded, and the chatter of the party dulled as the massive screen at the front of the ballroom flickered to life. I stood near the back, my service dress white stark against the sea of tuxedos and gowns, my heart steady but pounding. It was 9:15 p.m., and Thomas had just arrived, his face taut as he nodded to me from across the room. He'd set up the projector, the video file loaded and ready. My sister was still holding court near the stage, her laughter sharp, oblivious to what was coming. My mother and father stood nearby, clinking glasses with their elite guests, their smiles polished to perfection. They thought this night was theirs. They were about to learn otherwise. Thomas stepped forward, his voice cutting through the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, a moment please." Heads turned, murmurs rippling. My sister's eyes narrowed, sensing something off. Thomas didn't flinch. He clicked a remote and the screen lit up with grainy footage of the 2015 missile test. Smoke billowed, sailors shouted, and a missile spiraled out of control, exploding in a fiery wreck. The crowd gasped, glasses clattering as they set them down. Whitaker's voice boomed through the speakers, barking orders to secure the site, report it as a success. My father's company logo flashed on a crate, unmistakable. The room froze. I stepped forward, my boots clicking on the marble floor. "This is the truth," they hid. I said, my voice clear, carrying over the stunned silence. General Paul Whitaker falsified reports. 8 sailors were injured, 2 died, and my father's firm profited from the cover-up. The guests turned wide-eyed, some clutching their pearls, others whispering furiously. My sister's face drained of color, her wine glass trembling in her hand. My mother's smile vanished, her hand gripping my father's arm. He stood rigid, his jaw clenched, eyes darting to the exits. Then James Larson, my sister's husband, stood from his seat near the bar. His Navy lieutenant's posture was unmistakable even in a suit. He faced me, his expression unreadable, then raised his hand in a crisp salute. "Admiral?" he said, his voice steady, cutting through the tension. The word landed like a grenade. Guests gasped again, their whispers turning to a low roar. My sister's head snapped toward him, her eyes wild. "James, what are you doing?" she hissed, but he didn't look at her. His salute held a silent acknowledgement of my rank, my truth. I nodded back, my chest tight but my resolve ironclad. Charles Donovan stepped forward next, his weathered face grim. I'd known him as a mentor, a retired captain who'd shaped my early years in the Navy. He didn't need a microphone, his voice carried the weight of decades. "I was there in 2015, he said, pointing at the screen. "Whitaker ordered us to bury the truth. He threatened careers, silenced witnesses, and funneled money to Robert's firm to keep it quiet." He turned to the crowd, his eyes blazing. Those sailors deserved better. Their families deserved the truth. A woman in the crowd stifled a sob, her husband pulling her close. Others stared at my father, their faces shifting from shock to disgust. The room erupted into chaos. Guests shouted questions, some demanding answers, others edging toward the doors. My sister dropped her glass, red wine splattering her gown like blood. "This is a lie," she screamed, lunging toward the stage. "Sarah's making this up." My mother rushed to her side, her voice shrill. "Sarah, stop this. Now," she snapped, her composure shattered. My father pushed through the crowd, his face red, bellowing, "Turn that off." But Thomas stood firm, the video looping, Whitaker's voice damning him again and again. I held up the tiny listening bug I'd found in my sister's earrings, its wire glinting under the chandelier light. "This was in your gift from Whitaker, Emily," I said, my voice cold. "You were spying for him, weren't you?" The crowd turned to her, their murmurs growing hostile. Emily's mouth opened, but no words came. Her eyes darted to my mother, then my father, but they were too busy scrambling to save face. My father grabbed a waiter, demanding the projector be unplugged, but it was too late. The truth was out, and the guests, senators, CEOs, society matrons were witnesses. I stood tall, my stars gleaming. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was for the sailors who'd suffered, the families who'd been lied to. My sister's insults, my parents' manipulation, they were nothing compared to the lives lost. James lowered his salute, his gaze steady on me, a silent ally in a room of chaos. Charles stepped beside me, his presence a shield. The party was no longer a celebration, it was a battlefield, and I'd just fired the final shot. My family's empire was crumbling, and I wasn't done yet. The ballroom's chaos faded behind the heavy oak door as my mother yanked me into a private study, her grip tight on my arm. The taint of her perfume mixed with the sharp tang of spilled wine from my sister's shattered glass. My father followed, his face a mask of fury, and my sister trailed behind, her eyes red and frantic. James Larson slipped in last, closing the door with a soft click, his expression unreadable but steady. The room was small, lined with bookshelves and a single lamp casting long shadows. The party's hum was a distant murmur now, but the weight of what had just happened, Thomas's video, Charles's accusation, the guests' shock hung heavy in the air. It was 10:15 p.m., and this confrontation was the final nail. My mother spun on me, her pearl necklace glinting as she jabbed a finger in my face. "Sarah, you've ruined us," she hissed, her voice shaking with rage. "How dare you drag our name through the mud?" Her words were venom, but I'd heard them before every time I'd chosen my duty over their image. I stood tall, my service dress whites, crisp, the silver stars on my shoulders, a silent rebuke. "Diane, you ruined yourselves," I said, my voice low, but cutting. "You hid the truth about those sailors, and I'm done covering for you." My father stepped forward, his eyes blazing. "You think you're untouchable, Sarah," he growled, leaning in close, his breath hot with whiskey. "I can make sure you never work in the Navy again. One call to Whitaker and your career's over." The threat was bold, but it was hollow. Whitaker's name was poison, now exposed to a room full of senators and CEOs. I met his gaze unflinching. "Robert, your threats don't scare me," I said. "You're the one who's finished." His jaw twitched, his fists clenching, but he didn't speak. He knew I held the upper hand. My sister collapsed into a leather chair, her gown stained, her face crumpling. "Sarah, please," she begged, her voice breaking. "We didn't mean for anyone to get hurt." I didn't know about the bug. Her tears were real, but they were too late. I pulled the listening device from my pocket, holding it up. "You wore this, Emily," I said, my tone cold. "You spied for Whitaker for them, and you called me a failure. Don't play innocent now." She flinched, her hands covering her face, but I felt no pity. She'd chosen her side long ago, basking in their approval while I fought for scraps. James stepped forward, his Navy lieutenant's posture rigid. "Enough," he said, his voice calm but firm. He turned to me, his eyes steady. "Admiral, you did the right thing." The word Admiral hit the room like a shockwave. My sister's head snapped up, her tears forgotten, her mouth open in disbelief. My mother gasped, her hand flying to her chest. My father's face darkened, but he stayed silent. James continued, his voice unwavering. "I've seen the report, Sarah. I know what Whitaker did. You're not alone in this." His support was a lifeline, unexpected but solid, like an anchor in a storm. I turned to my family, my decision made. "I'm done with you," I said, my voice steady, each word deliberate. "I've spent my life trying to prove myself to you, but no more. You're not my family. You're a lie." My mother's face twisted, her voice shrill. "Sarah, you can't mean that. We're your blood?" But her words were empty, a final grasp at control. My father took a step toward me, his voice low and dangerous. "Walk away and you'll regret it," he said. I didn't blink. "I regret ever trying to please you," I shot back. Emily sobbed, reaching for me, but I stepped back. "Don't, Emily. You made your choice." I turned to the door, my boots clicking on the hardwood floor. James followed, his presence a quiet strength at my side. "Lieutenant Larson," I said, glancing at him. "Thank you." He nodded, a faint smile breaking through. "Always, Admiral." The door opened and the party's noise flooded back, guests still buzzing, the fallout of the truth spreading like wildfire. I didn't look back. My mother's cries, my father's threats, my sister's pleas, they were echoes of a past I was leaving behind. I'd built my life on honor, not their lies, and I was finally free. 6 weeks had passed since the party, and Annapolis had changed. The crisp November air carried a quiet I hadn't felt in years. My office at the naval base was a sanctuary now, its walls lined with charts and commendations, the weight of my family's betrayal finally lifted. The fallout from that night had been swift and unrelenting. General Paul Whitaker's arrest made headlines, his face plastered across news channels as military police escorted him from his Virginia estate. The charges were heavy: falsifying reports, endangering lives, and misappropriating funds tied to the 2015 missile test. The evidence Thomas had uncovered, bolstered by Charles Donovan's testimony, left no room for escape. Whitaker's career was over, his legacy a stain. My father's empire crumbled just as fast. His real estate firm, once a cornerstone of Annapolis's elite, filed for bankruptcy within a month. The financial trail linking his company to Whitaker's cover-up had sparked investigations, and investors pulled out overnight. I saw the headlines on my tablet: Mitchell Properties collapses amid scandal. My father's name, once spoken with reverence, was now a whisper of disgrace. I felt no joy in it, only a hollow relief. My mother's charity galas vanished from the social calendar, her influence gone. My sister's online presence, her carefully curated influencer persona, went silent after a flood of comments called her out for the listening device. I hadn't spoken to any of them since I walked out of that study. They were no longer my family. I leaned back in my chair, the morning light filtering through the blinds. A stack of letters sat on my desk, each one a quiet testament to why I'd fought. The families of the sailors from the 2015 test had written to me, their words raw and heartfelt. One letter from a widow named Clara stood out. "Admiral Mitchell," she wrote, "you gave my husband's sacrifice meaning. We finally know the truth." I read it again, my throat tight. Another letter from a sailor's son thanked me for honoring his father's memory. 8 families had suffered in silence, their pain buried under lies. Now they had closure, and I had purpose. I folded the letters carefully, placing them in a drawer beside my commendation badge, the one my sister had tossed aside. The Navy hadn't stayed quiet either. Last week I'd been called to the base for a ceremony. The command room was packed, officers in dress white standing shoulder to shoulder. The base commander, Admiral Hayes, stepped to the podium, his voice steady. "Rear Admiral Sarah Mitchell," he said, "your courage in exposing corruption has upheld the Navy's honor." He pinned a Distinguished Service Medal to my uniform, the crowd's applause ringing in my ears. I stood tall, my stars gleaming, but my mind was on the sailors who'd never come home. This wasn't about me, it was for them. James Larson was there in the front row, his nod a quiet echo of his salute at the party. "Well done, Admiral," he said afterward, his grip firm as we shook hands. His support hadn't wavered, a rare constant in a world that had shifted beneath me. I left the ceremony with a clarity I hadn't known before. For years, I'd carried the weight of my family's expectations, their disdain a shadow over every achievement. Now, I was free. My office phone buzzed, a message from Thomas: "Case closed. Whitaker's trial starts next month." I smiled faintly, setting the phone down. The truth had won, but it wasn't just about justice. It was about the life I'd built, the one they'd never understood. My sister's taunts, my mother's guilt trips, my father's threats, they were gone, replaced by the respect of my peers and the gratitude of strangers who mattered more. I stood adjusting my uniform and looked out the window at the base below. Sailors moved with purpose, their drills precise under the morning sun. I wasn't tied to a family that saw me as a failure. My legacy was here in the Navy, in the lives I'd touched by standing for what was right. The letters, the medal, the quiet pride in my chest, they were enough. I was Admiral Sarah Mitchell, and I was finally home. The morning sun filtered through my office window at the Naval Academy, casting a warm glow over the charts and medals on my desk. I sat in my service dress whites, the silver stars on my shoulders, a reminder of the path I'd chosen. The chaos of that party, the accusations, the betrayal, the truth laid bare, felt like a lifetime ago. But the lessons I'd learned, the clarity I'd gained, were as sharp as ever. I wasn't just Rear Admiral Sarah Mitchell anymore. I was someone who'd faced the ugliest truths and come out stronger. And I wanted you, the ones listening to this story, to know what it taught me. Honor isn't just a word in the Navy. It's a code, a promise to stand for what's right, even when it costs you everything. For years, I let my family's expectations define me. My mother's disapproval, my father's demands, my sister's taunts. They were chains I didn't see until they nearly broke me. I fought to prove myself to them, to earn a place in a family that never valued me. But that night when I exposed their lies, I realized something honor isn't about pleasing others. It's about holding yourself to a standard they can't touch. I stood up for the sailors who'd been silenced for the truth they deserved, and in doing so, I found my own strength. Manipulation is a poison, and it's everywhere, not just in families like mine, but in the world around you. It's the voice that tells you you're not enough, that you need to bow to someone else's agenda to be worthy. My family used it to control me, to keep me small, so their empire could shine. They hid behind wealth and status, but it was a house of cards built on lies that crumbled when the truth came out. Don't let anyone do that to you. Whether it's a parent, a partner, or a society that demands you conform, recognize the signs. They'll guilt you, shame you, make you doubt your worth. But you are enough. You don't need their approval to live your truth. I think about the sailors' families, often the ones who wrote to me after that night. Their letters sit in my drawer, a reminder of why I fought. They lost husbands, fathers, sons because of greed and deceit, but they found closure because I refused to stay silent. That's what honor means, to act for those who can't, to fight for what's right, no matter who stands against you. I'm not saying it's easy. It's a battle, one that leaves scars. But those scars are proof you chose the harder path, the one worth taking. To everyone watching this, I want you to think about your own battles. What's holding you back? Who's trying to define you? Don't let them. You have the power to break free, to build a life that's yours, not theirs. I learned that the hard way, but I'm stronger for it. And you can be too. If my story resonates with you, share it. Tell me in the comments what you've faced, what you've overcome. Your voice matters, and I want to hear it. Hit that subscribe button, join this journey, and let's keep pushing for the truth together.
My mom spit those words out like venom, standing in the center of my living room, the house I bought with 15 years of work, no cosigner, no help. Just me. My sister Brooke sat slouched on the couch, dabbing fake tears into a sleeve that probably wasn't even hers. I said I was sorry, she sniffled, her voice carefully cracked like she'd practiced it in the mirror. My dad stared down at the rug like he was studying it for clues. And my brother Kyle? He smirked like he was enjoying a rerun of a show he already knew the ending to. This wasn't a conversation. It was an ambush. You're being selfish, Mom snapped. You live alone in a 3-bedroom house. Your sister is trying to get clean. She needs a proper facility. She's been to 3, I replied, my voice calm. Too calm. She needs your help, she shot back. You're her sister. Sell the house. Use the money to save her. Isn't that what family does? What family? I asked, looking around the room. This family, she hissed like I was the outsider. The one that raised you. Gave you everything. Everything. You mean the babysitting? The screaming? The years I spent being the adult in a house full of grown children? Kyle leaned back in the chair, arms folded, enjoying the show. Come on, Aaron. Be the hero you always wanted to be. My name is Aaron Mitchell, and from wherever you're watching this, stay with me. Because sometimes to find peace, you have to vanish first. That night, I packed a single bag. Passport, birth certificate, a small envelope of savings no one knew about. I wiped my laptop, deactivated every card, rerouted my mail to a P.O. box no one had access to. I took down every photo of me, cleared every trace of myself from that house. And just before I walked out, I placed a single key on the kitchen counter. No note, no warning, no second thoughts. I was 12 when I learned how to write a check. Not mine, of course. It was Mom's. She was too tired, too distracted, too something, so she handed me the checkbook and said, just copy the numbers. You're smart. You'll figure it out. That's how it always was. I figured it out. While my sister Brooke snuck out of the house in crop tops and smeared mascara, I was at the kitchen table balancing utility bills. While she ran off with boys and wrecked her first car, I was folding laundry, scheduling Dad's doctor appointments, cooking dinner after school. They called me responsible. What they meant was useful. By 16, I had a part-time job. By 18, I had 2. They didn't ask where the paychecks went. They just watched groceries fill the fridge, gas appear in the tank, shoes magically replace themselves when Brooke wore mine out. I never said no. I didn't know I was allowed. College? I commuted. Slept 5 hours a night. Still covered part of Brooke's tuition when she failed sophomore year and needed a second chance. She always needed second chances. She collected them like trophies. They said she was just going through something. What was I going through? Didn't matter. No one asked. I got my first real job at 23. Marketing assistant at a mid-tier agency, terrible hours, low pay. But I worked. Every promotion, earned. Every raise, fought for. I climbed the ladder while watching Brooke get bailed out of credit card debt by my parents, using money I later found out was partly mine. I bought my house at 32, a modest 3-bedroom with good bones in a quiet neighborhood. I had my name on the deed, my own mortgage, and for the first time, a front door that locked behind me without guilt. But I never really got to live in it. Within weeks, Brooke was between places. Mom started calling it Aaron's place like it was a hotel. Dad joked, "You've got the space, why not?" Every time they showed up, it cost me something. Time, money, peace. Every time they left, they took something with them. Groceries, towels, sometimes a bottle of wine I was saving. I became the bank, the backup plan, the cushion they fell on every time they jumped without looking. But here's the thing about cushions. Eventually, they get tired of being stomped on. They stopped seeing me as a person and started seeing me as a resource, a safety net, the responsible one, the one who'd never say no, because saying no would mean I was cold. Saying no would mean I didn't love them. But love without boundaries isn't love. It's obligation wearing a mask. And the worst part? They didn't even hide it anymore. My house was their solution to every mistake. Car repo? Erin will cover it. Rent short? She'll help. Rehab number 4? Sell the house. She doesn't need that much space anyway. They didn't want me to live. They wanted me to fund their mistakes. It started with the water bill. Not a huge jump, just enough to make me pause. Then it was the power. Then groceries I hadn't bought. Toiletries I didn't use. Gas missing from my tank, even though I worked remotely. I started running the numbers, not just in my head, but on paper. And they didn't add up. I wasn't living alone anymore. Not really. Brooke had been crashing in my guest room for 3 months. She didn't pay rent, didn't buy food, spent her days scrolling her phone or sleeping until noon, then disappearing for hours and coming back smelling like whiskey and someone else's cologne. Every week there was a new story, a new disaster. My car got skimmed. I lost my job. It was toxic anyway. My car broke down again. I'll pay you back next Friday. Friday never came. One night, I came home early from a meeting. I paused in the hallway when I heard my mom's voice, low and sharp, through Brooke's cracked bedroom door. She'll fold. She always does. A silence. Then Kyle's voice laughing. She's predictable. One guilt trip and boom, she's signing checks. They didn't know I was home. They didn't know I was listening. They were counting on me folding. Again, it wasn't even about Brooke anymore. It was all of them, circling like vultures around whatever stability I'd built. They weren't worried about my house. They saw it as a resource, a vault with my name on it. And they weren't guessing. They'd done this before. Memories started clicking into place. That emergency call in 2019 when Kyle said his apartment flooded. Later I found out he moved in with a girlfriend that same week. The missing insurance check my mom swore never came. I found the deposit receipt in her glove box when I borrowed her car. They had a rhythm, a system. Build the crisis, trigger my guilt, get the money. I wasn't a person. I was a strategy. And every time I said yes, I trained them to expect it again. They didn't even need to ask nicely anymore. Just mention the word family and watch me cave. I didn't scream. I didn't storm into that room and throw their lies in their faces. I just stood in the hallway, my hand on the wall, steadying myself. And I made a decision. Not a loud one. Not the kind you announce with slamming doors and ultimatums. A quiet decision, like a tide shifting under the surface. This time I won't fold. This time I'll disappear. They thought I was sulking. They thought I'd cave like always, that I just needed a few days of silent treatment before I'd come crawling back with a check in hand and guilt in my eyes. But while they whispered and plotted, I was planning my escape. I started with research, the boring kind most people scroll past. Property law, asset protection, identity shielding. I read until 3 a.m. for nights on end, cross-checking everything. I wasn't just leaving, I was severing. Next, I called my HR rep at work and gave my notice, quietly, strategically. I had 6 weeks of vacation banked, and I used every hour. To them, it looked like I was still employed, but I was already out. Then came the house. I didn't sell it, that would have tipped them off. I moved it into a private trust. On paper, I no longer owned anything. They couldn't touch what they couldn't find. I rerouted my paychecks, closed shared accounts, opened new ones under a business entity. Every subscription, every piece of mail, gone redirected. Even my driver's license, changed to a P.O. box in a state I didn't live in. I encrypted everything, backed up my data, scrubbed my devices, set up dual authentication on accounts they didn't even know existed. By day I smiled, played the part, let Brooke steal my shampoo, let Kyle borrow my car, let Mom lecture me about selfishness while eating the lunch I made. I made them feel safe, comfortable, like they'd won. I left little things behind. A misplaced journal, a half-finished to-do list on the fridge, a few bills paid in advance. But the big things? Gone. Shifted. Locked down. They didn't notice, because they were too busy planning how to divide my life between themselves. Once she caves, we can sell the house. She won't need all that retirement money. We raised her. She owes us. They said those things. Out loud. In front of me. And I just kept smiling. The night I left, the air smelled like rain, that kind of fresh, almost electric quiet before a storm. I carried one suitcase. Left the closet half full. Texted Brooke. Gone for the weekend. Don't trash the place. I walked out the front door and didn't look back. No tears. No drama, just one item left behind, a single house key placed on the kitchen counter like a peace offering. But it wasn't. That key didn't unlock a door. It unlocked their downfall. It took them 2 days to notice I was gone. On day 3, Brooke tried to throw a party in my house. She walked in like she owned it, probably assumed she'd have weeks before I came crawling back. But the Wi-Fi was shut off. The power? Disconnected. The fridge? Empty. The closets? Hello. She called Mom. Mom called Kyle. Kyle drove over, used his spare key. It didn't work. The locks had been changed. Not illegally. Not in secret. Legally by the trust that now owned the home. A trust with no forwarding address. A trust with one clause. No family access. No shared liability. No right to contest. They tried everything. Mom called the city. Claimed I was missing. They were told I'd filed an official relocation notice. Brooke contacted my old HR rep, learned I'd quit a month earlier. She screamed into the phone, demanded to know where I'd gone. She got a polite response and nothing else. Kyle, ever the fixer, called a friend at the bank, tried to peek into my accounts. They were empty, closed, legally dissolved and migrated. Even my emergency fund, the one Mom used to borrow from, was gone. Then the letters arrived, each one sent by certified mail, each one personalized, each one the truth. To Mom, a breakdown of every expense I'd covered for 20 years. The dental bills, the late car payments, the rehab deposits, the rent I paid without credit. To Kyle, screenshots of his texts asking for money, pretending they were emergencies, while vacationing in Cabo. To Brooke, a list of missed job interviews, fake excuses, the 3 iPads she claimed were stolen, but actually sold. Also enclosed, a voided check from the college fund they guilted me into contributing to, rerouted back to my trust before I left. I didn't threaten them. I didn't scream or accuse. I documented. And when people read facts on paper, their own handwriting, their own lies, they stop arguing. They start unraveling. I heard from an old coworker that Kyle lost a contract after his client got wind of the financial stunt he tried to pull. Mom stopped showing up to church for a while. Too many questions. Brooke moved in with some guy across town. Word was she tried telling people I abandoned the family. Funny how that doesn't land when your own sister leaves you an itemized receipt. I never called, never showed up to explain. They were left with silence, the one thing none of them knew how to survive in. No one to yell at, no one to guilt trip, no one to twist with pity and debt. There was no explosion, no fire, no final showdown, just the slow, humiliating realization that I was gone, and they were never going to find the old version of me again. My revenge wasn't loud. It was clean, precise, irreversible. Families fall apart two ways. Suddenly like a glass dropped on tile, or slowly like wood rotting from the inside. Mine did both. Once the money stopped, the rot surfaced fast. Without me around, they had no buffer, no fixer, no plan B. The first cracks came in group texts, screenshots sent to me anonymously by an old cousin who stayed neutral. Brooke accused Kyle of stealing from Mom. Kyle fired back that Brooke was a manipulative addict. Mom replied with a one-liner that said everything. Your sister left because she was tired of carrying us. That's when the real fight started. Kyle drove to Mom's house and pounded on the door. She wouldn't let him in. 2 days later, Mom showed up at Brooke's apartment, half drunk and crying. Brooke locked her out. By the end of the week, Kyle had blocked both of them. I didn't respond to any of it. Didn't need to. Because the house, my house, wasn't just brick and drywall. It was the engine they all leaned on. The unspoken safety net they built their chaos around. And now it was gone. Brooke's addiction, the one I spent years dragging her out of, came roaring back. She tried to sell her laptop, the one I'd bought her during her clean streak. Pawned it for a weekend binge and got arrested after a bar fight. Kyle tried to launch business, couldn't get a loan with the debt in his name. Tried to spin the story to investors that his sister stole from him. They checked the records. They found nothing. He went silent after that. Mom? She unraveled the slowest. Started calling old friends. One she hadn't spoken to in years. Said she was betrayed by me. That I'd been ungrateful. But no one really listened. Because even the best storytellers sound hollow when their audience remembers the truth. Eventually, she stopped talking to people altogether. Dad didn't say a word through any of it. He never did. The man who watched me raise his children while he drank in the garage just kept sipping his whiskey and pretending none of it was happening. I watched it all quietly from another state, another life. No contact, no reaction, just enough distance to finally breathe. My phone stayed on Do Not Disturb. My inbox was filtered. Every voicemail saved, not to revisit, but to remember. Not one message said they missed me. Not one message said they were sorry. Just variations of, come home. Fix this. We need you. That was the truth. They finally noticed I was gone. But not because they missed me. Because they needed me. In the beginning, my silence felt like punishment. I mistook the stillness for loneliness. Mistook the freedom for guilt. But grief is sneaky like that. It makes you mourn people who were never really there for you. The first 6 months in the new city were quiet. I rented a small apartment with southern light that warmed the floors in the morning. Took walks without needing to tell anyone where I was. Bought groceries for one. Cleaned up after just myself. It was surreal and sacred. I got a job I never would have applied for before. Senior operations manager at a company where no one knew my last name. And for the first time, my life wasn't just survival. It was mine. Therapy came later, once the adrenaline wore off, and the silence grew a little too loud. At first, I told my therapist I was fine. She smiled, nodded, and said, "That's usually where the story starts." She helped me untangle years of buried resentment, dressed up as duty. Helped me say out loud that being needed wasn't the same as being loved. That I wasn't cruel for leaving. I was kind to myself for the first time. Eventually, I started writing again. Not for them. Not to explain. But to remember. Essays. Short stories. Anonymous blog posts about daughters who disappear and women who rebuild. And slowly the comments came. This sounds like my family. I thought I was the only one. Thank you for putting it into words. I wasn't alone anymore, and neither were they. I met other women who had walked away from the same fire I had and stopped apologizing for not staying to burn. We built something small but steady, a digital circle, a private group, a space for daughters who carried too much for too long. We didn't talk about revenge. We talked about peace. One day, someone messaged me directly. She was 24, working 3 jobs, and still being told she was selfish for wanting her own apartment. She wrote, "How do you stop being their daughter?" I replied with what I'd finally learned. You don't stop loving them. You stop letting them write your story. It took me a long time to stop checking my inbox for their names. Even longer to stop imagining fake reunions where they'd show up crying, apologizing, asking for a second chance. But that moment never came. And eventually I stopped needing it to. Because my healing wasn't waiting for them to change. It was born the day I changed. I kept my new address private. Stopped explaining where I'd gone. Stopped answering messages that began with guilt. I didn't owe them a return ticket just because I'd once lived in their house. Now, when people ask about my family, I say this. I was raised by people I had to unraise myself from. And I say it without shame, because I'm not their daughter anymore. I'm something they never planned for. Free. You can love people and still leave them behind. 1 year later, I walked past my old house. It was quiet, too quiet for a Saturday morning. The shutters were faded now, and the for sale sign out front tilted slightly in the winter wind. No balloons. No welcome mat. No one inside. It looked like a place that had been abandoned, then filled with chaos and then abandoned again. I paused across the street, coffee in hand, coat pulled tight against the cold. A part of me had expected this moment to hit like a wave, regret maybe, sadness, but all I felt was calm, like I was watching someone else's story, like I was just a tourist in the town where my past used to live. A year ago, this house was everything, the center of every fight, every guilt trip, every sacrifice I was told to make for family. Now, it was just a shell, a listing with no offers, a property stripped of its anchor, a home that never really was one, at least not for me. I heard later from a former neighbor that they all moved out, separately. Kyle first, after the fight with Mom turned physical. Brooke next, in the middle of the night, leaving behind a mattress and 3 eviction notices. Mom tried to stay, but without support, the mortgage drowned her. She stopped answering the door. Eventually, she stopped answering anything. They never rebuilt. They never apologized. They never came looking. And that's the part one thought would hurt, but didn't. Because what they lost wasn't just me. They lost the only person who kept them whole. There are pictures of me in that house in photo albums shoved somewhere under the stairs, probably. Pictures of birthday cakes I paid for, presents I wrapped, faces I smiled at while breaking inside. But memories are just echoes if no one else wants to keep them alive. And I had already buried mine. I stood there for a while longer. Let the wind carry away the silence. And then I turned, walked back to my car, and drove home to the city where no one calls me selfish for being at peace. Where no one asks me to set myself on fire just to keep them warm. I'm not angry anymore. I don't need them to understand. I don't need closure from their mouths. Because I built my own. It looks like morning light on clean floors. Like laughter that isn't forced. Like loving myself without apology. When I left that night, 1 year ago, I didn't leave a note. I didn't leave a scene. I left one thing. A single key. They held it like a symbol of victory. They thought it meant I was coming back. They didn't realize it was the last piece of me they'd ever see. I didn't just leave the house. I left the version of me who believed love had to hurt. I left the girl who gave and gave, hoping it would one day be enough. I left the ghost they fed on. They thought I was their foundation. But when I left, they learned I was the only thing holding it all together.